All right, let's turn now to this economic crisis in Sri Lanka. Riots, it's overthrown the government. We've seen the Prime Minister and the President forced to flee the country. But it serves as a stark warning for two reasons. One, countries who push extreme green agriculture policies, even in the short term, will reap devastating effects. And two, beware of the China debt trap. Sri Lanka's drowning in debt, most of that, of course, lent by China, and it's replicated right across the region. To discuss this and what we need to learn out of this issue in Sri Lanka and more, a fantastic Tuesday night panel from Malali, former Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson, and from Sydney, Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Gentlemen, welcome. Nick, to you first. We've said it's an economic disaster for months. It's now actually a humanitarian disaster. People can't pay for food and fuel. The country itself isn't getting the imports in because in terms of trade issues, they can't afford to pay for them, particularly medicines. 22 million people. This is the result of green ag policy madness. And it's all right for the rich. They've all fled the country, but the poor are left to fight to survive.
That's right. And it strikes me that George Soros should dip his hand in his pocket and try and help the country out. He's got plenty of money, and it's people like him and Joseph Stiglitz who've been encouraging Sri Lanka to go down this organic path, this complete unsustainable nonsense that sent the country broke. And it's absolutely tragic. And as you pointed out, the real problem here down the track may be China, which has lent, I think, more than $35 billion to Sri Lanka. And so basically has it hanging on a string now. I mean, China will be able to pull the strings if it wants. There's also a question mark, of course, whether China can sustain the huge amount of debt. But I just want a quick aside. I saw in Woolworths the other day barramundi from Sri Lanka. I mean, how bizarre is that?
John, there's two issues. There's this debt trap diplomacy, Laos, Pakistan, Bangladesh, lots of countries in our region, which we've seen with Solomon Islands and more, in a similar situation. And then you've got this green agricultural dimension as well, and not just not using fertiliser. We've seen with the issues in Ukraine, which produces a lot of fertiliser, a shortage of supply too.
Well, in this climate change debate, if I can come to that, one of the big realities is, because that's what happened, Sri Lanka went off to COP in Scotland and made a hero of itself. We'll ban ammonia-based fertilisers. The big emitters are electricity, around 35% in Australia, so how we get to a 43% reduction without impacting other industries, I don't know. Ammonia, which essentially uses gas as its feedstock to produce the fertilisers that this world is still totally dependent upon to feed itself, steel and concrete. And I don't know why we're not being much more analytical about the sort of policy proposals that are going to be required for us to meet what will apparently be a legislated base in Australia. But this is happening right across the world. What happened to careful planning? What happened to prudence? What happened to proper cost-benefit ratios? As one who was often slammed for being an echo rat and worried about debt, we now have a world awash with debt, including China, and it probably has very few options itself and is probably not likely to exercise nice ones. So, frankly, we are in a world of trouble and we need a proper public debate about these things. But as I've said many times, we've just had an election when people, strangely in this country, didn't engage in the things that are now really threatening global stability. It isn't just climate change. It's the policy response to it very often.
Nick, the line out of the coalition at the time was money was cheap. Australians fell for it too. I mean, home loan borrowing levels went through the roof, level of household indebtedness, how much debt we've consumed as a household went through the roof. And of course, now we find out money's not so cheap. You've always got to pay it back. And when Jim Chalmers was on his feet in Canberra yesterday, we find that the interest bill that Australia will pay over the forward estimates, so that's the next 4 years of the federal budget, it's $100 billion. Now, that's just the interest payment. So that's dead money like it is on everyone's mortgage. When are we going to have that conversation?
Well, I'd like to start having it now, Peter. I actually wanted to start having this conversation 3 years ago, to be honest. I mean, because this problem has been a long time in coming. We've had cheap money in the system really since the great financial crisis in 2008. The Reserve Bank has been, overnight lending rate has been very low and has went down to almost zero, of course. Now, Economics 101 tells you that cheap money in the system for that long will create inflation. It's not like we didn't know this was coming. I think the Reserve Bank has got some answering to do on this, but it always worried me at the time when we went into debt that there would reach a point where interest rates rose and the servicing of those debts would be a huge amount of money that we could otherwise spend on hospitals, roads, schools, etc.